Okay, why don't we get started with the BK 48 Section 3 Communities Subcommittee meeting on November 7th, 2024 at around 6:01 p.m. First thing on our agenda is a bylaw presentation. I would kick that over to Samantha Elliott if she's prepared.
I'm ready.
Good. Oh, I've forgotten the pledge. Sorry, folks. Why don't we start by facing the flag and join me, please, in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, folks. I got ahead of myself a little bit. I will now give it to Samantha Elliott for the presentation.
All right. All right, so the overview of this presentation is going to review what the districts are that are part of the proposed bylaw. How did we get here? There's a lot of collaboration with the public, or public meetings, a number of different public meetings. There were 852 responses to our online survey that went out, and then 2 public forums where the public was able to engage and give their comments and feedback. From those public engagement events, we gained insight on a new map, new locations, whether or not offsite was desired, which was an option provided by the state law, and if there was support for character areas. So being able to meet the existing conditions and development pattern of the area versus having one blanket overlay with a full application to every site. So the MBTA communities bylaw required in Wakefield for us to have a minimum of 36 acres, 1,696 units, a density of 15 units per acre, and 75% of our district, or a minimum of 27 acres, 1,272 units, needs to be located within half a mile of a transit station for the commuter rail, and up to 25% could be off-site. So we took all of this information along with the feedback from the public and came up with a new bylaw. If you would like maps to follow along, there's some up here. They're also in the info packet. And there's a version up here that's kind of a little hard to see because it's very small. But it created a new overlay district, again, that's being proposed. So there are 4 different character areas. There's the industrial loft character area, which is around Foundry. There's the high-rise residential character area, which is off Audubon. There's the neighborhood commercial character area, which is an Albion and Greenwood area. And then the mandatory mixed-use character area, which is North Ave, and right around the train station there in Wakefield Center. So you might wonder what's a character area. If you haven't been here for one of my other presentations, I've heard it. It really just allows us to maintain the existing development in the area. So if you have residential structures, you wouldn't want commercial developed the same density or same height, same setbacks in a residential area. So we kind of take all of that into consideration and try to maintain the existing character. So if there's a commercial area like up and down Main Street, you would maintain similar setbacks, similar height, similar stories, and some fenestration, which is the glass and variation of the storefront. So those are all things that we can regulate through a character area. So the first district is the industrial loft character area. It is off of Foundry. Currently, there are 458 existing units that people are living in. Excuse me, there are units that are under construction. So there's about 60 more units or so that are going to be added to that. For things that are under construction. And it could potentially have, if fully built out, 775 units. Again, that would require everything to be completely flattened and then built up to the absolute maximum capacity. There are still underlying zoning regulations of parking that need to be met. So in this particular character area, it's 1.5 spaces per unit. The building footprint per building could not exceed 15,000 square feet. So a large massing could not be built there. They would need to break it up into various buildings. The lot coverage is maxed out at 60%, so you can't have 100% lot coverage in this area. The front and side setbacks are 10 feet, rear is 15 unless it's abutting residential, at which point it would have an additional 10 feet added to it, so it would be 25 feet instead of 15. And the maximum height would be 5 stories or 57 feet. And it could be either residential or mixed use, meaning the first floor could be commercial and then the subsequent floors above that would be residential. So all of that is just specific to the Foundry Street area. It's not, these are not conditions that could be applied to the other character areas. This map shows the existing density in the area. So the darker the parcel, the higher the density. The ones that are gray that are still within the boundaries are non-residential uses at this point. So most of this particular area is residential. And these are examples of what is there currently and similar to what could be built, but not quite the same. Grayson Lofts is actually 6 stories, so it would not be able to be built by right under MBTA communities. If somebody wanted to come in and build that, they would have to revert back to standard zoning and go through the special permit process, which is still an option, just not part of MBTA communities. So the next district would be Audubon Road, which is a high-rise residential, and it encompasses only one parcel, which is where Colonial Heights, or I'm sorry, Colonial Point is located. So this particular map shows the watershed and wetlands areas that are excluded from development. So anything that's hatched could not be developed on. The area that is red is the only area that is able to be developed under MBTA communities by right. And if somebody were to develop it, they could go up to 10 stories in height. Currently it's 12 stories. Their setbacks would need to be 20 for this front, which is facing any road, 30 feet for the side and 30 feet for the rear. Lot coverage would be a 30% maximum, and the building footprint couldn't exceed 20,000 square feet per building. And it would still have a 1.5 spaces per unit, which is pretty standard here in Wakefield. And currently it's 176 units. Under maximum capacity of MBTA communities, it would be 418. Again, still somebody has to meet all of the requirements, and whether or not that could actually be built is an entirely different animal, because there is an existing structure that I believe is fully rented out at this point. So the other district is the North Avenue mixed use district. It is all up and down the east side of North Ave, and then includes a section on the west side of North Ave right around the train station, and is bound by Chestnut, Tuttle, and Allegheny Street. Historic stations. So in this particular area, there is a requirement for mandatory mixed use. So the first floor would have commercial space, the second and third floor would be residential. It would be, the setbacks are reflective of what the existing conditions are. So you would have 0 front setback, a 0-foot side setback, and then the rear would be 15 feet unless it's abutting residential, at which point it would be 25. The maximum lot coverage in this area would be 50%. Building footprint can't exceed 10,000 square feet. And the parking requirements for the first floor commercial space is 0, which is consistent with downtown Wakefield parking requirements. And then the residential would again require 1.5 spaces per unit, like elsewhere and currently there are 83 units, residential units in this area, and you could put under MBTA communities 156. Now this area does include the Tono building, which could not be built under MBTA communities. They would have to go through the standard zoning and a special permit process, because the height is capped at 3 stories total under MBTA communities. So anything above that would have to revert back to standard zoning and have a different discretionary process. So this shows the existing developments. Tono is the one that's on at the bottom, and then there are a handful of other residential uses that are up and down North Ave, but it's primarily just commercial. That's part of why it was important to mandate commercial use on the first floor, so we don't lose that commercial character of the area, the services, the business, as well as the tax base. So what it could look like, this is, I'm aware this is Main Street, not North Ave. However, I wanted to show you kind of what was there historically is you had in Wakefield a number of mixed use structures. So it's consistent with the proposal of adding these mixed use structures is consistent with existing and historic development in Wakefield. The building actually all the way to the right used to actually be 4 stories, not 3 stories. There was a mansard roof that you can't really see, except a little clip of it in this picture. And down most of Main Street, there were a number of other 3 and 4 story mixed use buildings. The other areas are on Albion Street, there's the neighborhood commercial character area. Currently there are 70 units, and under MBTA communities, 50 units to be built. I wonder where there's discrepancy. There is a 5-story garden apartment building at the corner of Richardson and Foster. It's not an apartment, it's actually a condo building, but and that is incorporated in this particular district. So this area would be residential or mixed use. There is no mandate for mixed use. However, there is in keeping with the North Avenue mixed use district, there's a 0 parking for the commercial space on the first floor. And then 1.5 spaces per residential unit. 8 floors above that they built. They can go up to 3 stories with commercial, or it's capped at 2 stories if it's just residential. And again, meets the existing setback of the area, which is a 0 foot front setback and a 0 foot side setback, and a rear would be 15 feet unless it's abutting residential. At what point it was 25. Similar lot coverage to North Ave, and also the similar footprint maximums. Here are the existing residential uses all up and down North Ave, not North Ave, on Albion, between North Ave and Main Street. So you have a number of different residential uses, but there's also a lot of commercial. So in an effort to really maintain the connection between North Ave and Main Street, the subcommittee felt it was really important to incorporate that mixed use component here. The next district would be Greenwood. It is also a neighborhood commercial, so it's going to have the same setbacks and density and height that I just outlined for Albion Street. This particular area has primarily commercial uses. There are a handful of residential multifamily buildings up and down this area. And then there's one existing mixed use building at the corner of Greenwood and Main Street. It's a 3-story gray building, has commercial on the first floor and then residential on the upper floors. So in this particular area, again, it could be residential at 2 stories or a mixed use building with commercial on the first floor, and then 2 floors of residential above, so for a full height of 3 stories. The existing development has 89 units in this particular area, and under MBTA communities, if fully built out, could potentially have 323 units. Again, people have to meet requirements on site. So what would get built or could get built is an entirely different conversation. But the colored parcels show you where there's residential uses currently within the boundaries. Most of them, actually all of them within here are multifamily. So if you're curious also what neighborhood commercial would look like, you have a picture of Albion Street. The building on the left is actually the Wakefield item. You can see the open glass storefronts, which engage storefront windows, which engage the public. So when you're walking by, there's something for you to look at. There's something for you to have. Potentially, if it's a store in there, you would be able to stop in, eat or shop, or engagement with maybe a professional office. Right now, that particular area is mostly blocked in with brick. So that could be a potential benefit of adding these new developments to the area. The building on all the way over to the left, the rendering is an example of what mixed use could look like. That particular site is 184 Water Street. It has commercial on the first floor and residential on the upper floors. So if you're looking for an overview of what's being proposed, This is the little data that was on every individual page. Overall, it's proposing a maximum of 1,722 units. Again, whether that gets developed or not, this is not a mandate, it's just the potential. And the existing units in this area are 876, which still doesn't include the 65 units that are currently under construction over on Foundry. And it encompasses 54.4 acres. One of the benefits of this particular bylaw and this iteration is that short-term rentals are actually prohibited within the district boundaries. The goal of MBTA communities is to provide additional year-round housing and primarily market rate year-round housing. So the committee felt like it was important to explicitly prohibit it within all of the character areas of the overlay. Just as a side note, we've had some people reach out about whether or not this is affordable housing, if it's completely affordable, if it's all going to be Section 8, or if they're going to be immigrant shelters, or what's going on with this with MBTA communities in general. MBTA communities is for year-round market rate housing. So most of the units would be rented out at market rate. The MBTA communities state law allows for up to 10% affordable units, and that their definition of an affordable unit is 80% AMI or less. So you would have to make 91,000 and change or less per year in order to qualify for one of those units as a single person household. So they're not targeting just affordable housing. It's not a 40B project. But just to give you some overview of our progress on our subsidized housing inventory, in 2015, the town enacted what's called inclusionary zoning through a special permit process that allows 18% of the units of a multifamily project to be affordable at 80% AMI or less. So of the 1,320 units that have been built since 2015 under inclusionary zoning, 419 additional affordable units have been added. In April 2012, we were at 605 units, and you can look at these, but I'll just skip down to the bottom. In October, I can't remember the exact date that this number came from, but we have 1,028 units. So we're getting very close to 10%. And I can go over the specifics of that in the housing production plan if you join in on those meetings. But right now I want to try to stick to the overlay. So if you are curious about what non-compliance means, if you haven't heard, it impacts grant funding. And while our current number that we've been talking about for the last 3 years is $3.7 million, it also, the list is consistently changing. So unfortunately, that number is a moving target at this point. Just this week, we found out that 2 more grants have been added to the list that are education grants. I also reached out to MAPC, who just opened up their technical assistance grants. Those are also subject to MBTA communities compliance. So this number may or may not actually be reflective of how much we could be impacted. Again, because the list is consistently changing. And as we look at TIP projects, which is the transportation improvement projects, that would be about $2 to $4 million a project that we could potentially lose. And of course, we have to face the reality of the AG may sue the town, and we could end up being forced to comply, and may or may not have additional legal fees. This was the current list as of October 10th of the ones that I could readily get access to. Some of the education grants, I actually had to go back and forth with the department on verifying whether or not those are, and at this point, the additional ones that I had reached out to are not. That doesn't mean that they won't change. And I'm not here to scare anybody about this. I'm just trying to be transparent and let you know the reality of it. There's also a new grant program that was just set up for MBTA communities called MBTA Communities Catalyst Fund. This is the language. So this is the MBTA language that is on most of the grants. They're talking about compliance, have you met it for the deadline? If you want to look at that, this will be up online so you can read that. So the Catalyst Fund is $5 million per year. It's available with $250,000 to $1 million grants. You have to be an MBTA community or adjacent to an MBTA community district. I'm sorry, the project, the grant must be within or adjacent to the MBTA communities district. It could be a variety of different things, from design and engineering and infrastructure projects, construction, roadways. I think somebody just, I think it was Stoneham, somebody just got a $4 million grant related to some projects that are within their MBTA communities district, last I heard. So there's just a lot that this can potentially impact. The acquisition of properties for development of housing units is also covered by the MBTA Communities Catalyst Fund. So there's a lot of different things that could potentially help if we were able to apply those. In the last 3 years, just if you want kind of an overview of some of the different programs, these are some of the different grant programs that we have participated in, and one is the trying to maintain, or I mean, at least right now we are in compliance with MBTA communities, but come December 31st, that's what we're here to vote on, I suppose, or I mean, we'll be on the 16th. So this is kind of just an overview of what has been sent out. The town has sent out postcards to every single property owner within the boundaries of the district so that they are aware of the impact to their property. There are plenty of videos online. You'll hear similar presentations to the one I gave tonight if you watch any of them, but there's also all of the deliberation and conversations that the subcommittee has had about potential district between themselves as well as with the public. And then there's an info packet. You can get access to it online if you would like one, and you don't have one already, they are upfront for you to take at your leisure. And upcoming events, there's info session tonight, and then there are 3 different coffee hours at the Civic Center, Town Hall, and the Senior Center. That's it. Anybody have any questions? Or that's really
Thank you,
good.
Samantha. Yeah. First of all, any questions from members of the subcommittee at this time?
I think, Mr. Chairman, one thing I would just say is, so everyone that's watching or here tonight, the subcommittee is not promoting an agenda one way or the other. We simply are trying to put out an option for people to consider at town meeting. This is a direct result of what happened at a spring town meeting relative to the presentations and the votes that occurred. So that's why this was formed, the subcommittee. We don't have a preconceived notion of what should happen. It's ultimately up to all of the participants in town meeting to decide that. But this is an option that is available to people that represents the minimum compliance model. And we thought it was important, especially Mr. Chair, that we included all of the ever expanding list of grants and how that could have a real dollar impact, on our community. So people are aware of that. So you're making an informed choice, an informed decision.
Thank you, Councilor. Any questions, I guess, or comments from subcommittee members?
Thank you, Chair McLean. What I wanted to say is that when Sam is putting out this information about grants and about our subsidized housing inventory numbers and whatnot, that is vetted with actual documentation. The date you were looking for is October 21st, 2024. Because EOHLC actually puts out a list for us of what our subsidized housing inventory numbers are. So when she says it's 9.13, we have documentation showing that. The same thing with the grants that she was talking about. There's numerous on the subcommittee as well as town staff that look at the DESI website. And when we look at the education grants, we hone in on that language that she showed earlier, that it says, if you're not compliant with MBTA 40A, 3A, then you will not be eligible for this grant. Those that don't have that language, we don't put it on the list. If it has it on the language, we add it to the list. Now, that list is changing all the time, as you alluded to a couple of minutes ago. But we are making sure that when we put out language of what our subsidized housing inventory is, what grants we could potentially use, we are making sure that we have definitive proof of that information. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. I think I'd just add to that, that we have, we can have a solid number for the last 5 years at 3.7 million that we would have, had this been 5 years ago, lost. It's very difficult to prognosticate what the future is going to bring. So I try to stay away from that number because we don't know what it is. But we do know particular grant programs we've used in the past that we intend to use in the future. And the fact that, as has been stated, and I'm not particularly pleased about it, the grant list, the list of grants that are going to be affected seems to be an expanding universe. And that's somewhat troublesome, especially when you start seeing it, these DESI grants or education grants. And I'm not at all happy that, I don't know what that has to do with housing, but if they're expanding that list into education, it makes me very concerned. Item 2 is public participation. I think I'm going to reverse what I usually do. Usually we start in the room, but I usually have Steve here, telling me there's a hand up. So I think I'm going to start, if you folks don't mind, with Sherry and see if there are any questions from out there. Sherry, do we have anybody?
Yes, we do. We have Julie S. with her hand raised.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Julie.
Hi, good evening, Julie Scott, 4 Central Street. To Samantha, is this the pretty much the exact presentation that you'll be presenting at town meeting?
It's very similar. Some things might be switched around. I know there's one map that I need to just drop in the updated version, but generally speaking, it would be very, very
Okay.
similar.
Once it's updated, is there any way that this slideshow could be posted on the website? Because I'm looking on my computer and it's very small. And
Yeah, so all of the presentations, the past presentations are available on the MBTA Community Subcommittee, MBTA 40A Subcommittee page for the town. So you can actually go to that and that particular subpage, and I believe it's under meeting materials. Sherry might have to correct me, but you can access all of the past presentations, and they're all very similar. The information.
will this specific one, because it had the list of the grants and stuff, I'd like to see that.
Yeah, this one does have the most up-to-date list, and that is something that would be included. It's a PDF of the presentation, so that would be posted online.
And if you do update it again before town meeting, would the updated version be put up and posted for us to take a look at?
I can't speak to that because I don't know exactly who will be presenting. That's something that will be discussed tonight. But if I had that, maybe, but I can't speak to definitively. Again, these past presentations and all of the information will be posted at a proposed future town meeting presentation. Will be very, very similar.
Okay, if I could request that, if possible, 24 to 48 hours before the meeting, if the final presentation could be posted, so people could take a look, I'd appreciate it. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other online raised hands at the moment, Sherry?
No other hands at the moment, Mike.
Okay. Any questions from any of the participants in the room? Mr. McCollum.
I just have a question. So in your presentation, you had, and I know this is fluid with the grants, but you have $3.7 million over 3 years. But you just brought it up and I smirked at you because you said $3.7 million over 5 years.
Yeah,
So you had mentioned in the past
I have
that you
mentioned
had
this.
clarification that
Right.
it had been 5 years and not 3.
right.
And I know the total number of grants has been fluid and changed, but that 3.7 has been there for quite a while now.
Yeah.
In this conversation. So I just wonder if we can make sure, correct that, because that changes the total number each year based on what those actual numbers we know are were. Because over 5 years is a lot different than over 3 years, if it's a 3.7 million.
Yeah, I had verified that last round with, I believe with Aaron Kokenda.
Because I know
And
there
I've
was a-
always said that it was 3.7 over 5 years. I think we should put that, if you could just double check with Aaron that
Yeah,
that's correct.
absolutely, and I
There's
will
no
also,
reason not to. I mean, you know, divide by 5, 3.75, 3.73, you know, it looks like less than $1 million a year.
Yes.
It's still money,
Right.
still our tax dollars.
No, I get it. I mean, there was a 4.4 million number floating around. I know this flew and changed.
Yeah,
but it's different people are saying.
I didn't have the 4.4, I've only stuck to the 3.7. And then again, prospectively, you don't know, it's very difficult to come up with a number.
And that's
Counselor.
So I would add too, so anyone who's familiar with the Envision Wakefield downtown revitalization project, those are TIP projects. And Sam had indicated, TIPS funding. So we're on the TIPS list for 2 upcoming fiscal years. And it's not clear whether those funds would be impacted by non-compliance, but it is, to my understanding, but it is clear that any future projects of that sort would absolutely be impacted by our non-compliance. And so while we can't say definitively, I agree, we can't prognosticate about what the future holds, we can say, quantifiably, there are millions of dollars that we are getting into TIPS projects over the next several fiscal years. And our hope is that continues to be the case, going forward. So we've had good success with that funding source. You mentioned Sam Albion Street and the work that was done there. Those are the kinds of projects we wanted to be able to see more of, and that funding source has now been captured. I agree with the chairman, I think inappropriately so, the way that they keep expanding this. I mean, it's certainly a stick approach, not a carrot approach that the state has employed. But I think one thing to also keep in mind, and Sam highlighted this when she was talking about these areas, the areas that are focused on here are already largely developed. So when we're talking about the practical impact for these circled areas, it's presumably going to be quite negligible, because the larger buildings on Foundry Street are not going to be torn down to then allow these matter of right buildings or structures to be built. It wouldn't make any financial sense to do that. Similarly, the Audubon Road area is already well developed. So in a way, we've kind of banked, if you will, or gotten the credit for a lot of opportunity that ultimately is not going to be realized because of what is already currently in existence. Now, does that mean North Ave could have some development with the mixed use? Potentially, but from an economic development standpoint, we may not mind that, because we're talking about commercial on the first floor, which maintains that base, and then as housing close to transit, but with a comparatively more limited impact to the character of that strip and the neighborhood generally. So I think that's an important point to really underscore here, that these are not undeveloped parcels or acres of land that now have the potentiality to really increase housing. These are areas that on paper we're able to identify to be in compliance, but in practice, there's very limited development that would realistically happen in any of these areas. So I just think it's important for people to recognize that as well. And that is different than say what the planning board had proposed previously, that may have had a more direct neighborhood impact. Where this model does not present those same sorts of challenges. So just to be clear on that, but it does check off the box to allow for compliance, which is ultimately, a goal that a lot of people have expressed because of all of the grants that you're hearing about now. And that list undoubtedly will expand. It's expanded since we spoke about it in the spring.
Like, just
You have a follow-up there?
my initial, so I had a quick follow-up.
Sure.
Yeah, on the map that you have for Foundry Street, you have, and I don't know whether it's because of where the map is from, there's a thin line that goes all the way across to the Tuttle Street property. Which, because I know the zoning's the same, but is that to connect those two zones? Because they have to be contiguous, is that?
Yeah.
So whatever that street is, that's gonna be part of that zone, just that section that it runs down to connect to.
well, the street the street can't be developed with
Right, no, I
structures, but
understand.
it is within the boundaries of the
So
overlay
then,
zone.
so those zones are all conflated right there, all need to be connected.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct. We have to have a 50% contiguous district around
Okay.
one of the commuter rail stops that we have in order to meet the letter of the law.
No, it's fine,
So
it just looked
that's-
weird because it's just this
Yeah.
long little tiny line.
That's why it's connected. We were trying to get the acreage to hit that 50% number. And again, as the council.
But it all has to be, that's why they're all right there, because they all have to be connected together.
Correct, and as Councilor Dombrowski had mentioned that the goal really was to capture existing developments and capture existing effort that Wakefield has already made that is in keeping with the spirit of MBTA communities, which is residential development around the train stations. So we're trying to, in this plan, in this iteration, trying to capture that existing development that is already supporting that as best we can.
So,
And one quick thing to clarify too, I just wanted to let you know, one of the grants that is on the list is one of the METCO grants. Not here to debate the merits of any of that. I just want to give you a heads up that the METCO grants, a supplemental METCO grant has now been added to that list. I don't know if you know about the METCO program, but it brings in about $500,000 a year. So whether or not the main program would be impacted is obviously not reflected in the current list or current fiscal year of grants, but there is a supplemental METCO that is.
Councilor Kearney.
Yes, I just want to thank the committee. I think you've done an excellent job. In fact, I'm going to end what I say today with a question that came from a lifelong friend who asked a question. I think I gave that person the answer. But I have to mention that our state legislators, our senators and representatives are complicit in this. I mean, they are draining local aid, putting it in these fancy programs that they're coming up with, that they're developing, and then offering them up to us, and then telling us that we have to do it and we have to comply. We have to talk about that because it's wrong. It's wrong. We're really getting beaten on this. And I'm going to speak to that at town meeting. When you present this, these folks have done a great job. I've got 3 people who've called me who didn't know about it before. Now, at least I think most people know what's happening here and been informed. Lifelong friend of mine called, lives in Greenwood neighborhood on Main Street. And so some other people might be asking this question. If they don't want to do anything, they don't have to do it. There's nothing people are being forced to do. I just want to get your assurances that I gave the right answer there. And I didn't.
Right, there's
Chairman, I want to thank you.
no mandatory building requirement as a result of the MBTA communities. The way I've been looking at it is, the initial proposals last spring, I would thought there was a higher rate of risk. Now, might there be some building as a result of this plan? Of course, there's additional capacity being added. I think we've done a decent job of trying to minimize the risk of that. I thought there was a greater risk that somebody with a 631 Colonial, New England Colonial on Cedar Street might convert that, or a builder might convert that to a 3 or 4 family. Then there is that someone is going to, do something that I would consider to be untoward for the neighborhood in a place like, say, Albion. Now, Albion is not, as you stated, Mr. McCauley, specifically requiring first floor commercial. However, when you look at the composition of the buildings there, let's just say the item decided to go somewhere, or went totally into the internet world and wanted to do something with that building. I could foresee that being, I would very much expect that to be more likely to be a first floor commercial with 2 on top, instead of limited to only 2 stories residential, because of the numbers. So that would retain, if people are thinking that way, and there is some work done on Albion, I would hope that there would be a good measure, if not exclusive, of first floor commercial. We've made that mandatory on board, and as has been noted, some of the things that you can do under this proposed plan are less than what has been done in the past. Gray lofts at 6 stories wouldn't be done. Townhome with 4 stories, we're really minimizing the amount of this. They can still do it under the special permit, but they can't do it as a matter of right under MBTA communities. You know, so that's a three-story max, which is really not out of character. You've got the metropolitan building there that's already higher. You know, I think we've done try to do our best job of making things fit, putting them in multiple locations throughout town, because there was a lot of pushback. We were only around one train station. And yeah, that's all an answer to your friend's short question, which is not mandatory. You know, some building will probably result. I think my guess is that the setup of this plan will make it less than what would have occurred under any of the three proposals that were turned down at town meeting. And I opposed all three of them.
I think it's also important to point out, make no mistake, this is the state legislature stripping municipalities like ours of our autonomy to be able to make our own zoning decisions. And we all recognize that. I think this idea of a one-size-fits-all approach is completely inappropriate. I believe at least one, if not both, members of the subcommittee share that concern. But it is stripping a municipality of its zoning authority and autonomy, which is something that has been one of the fundamental aspects of the way in which we have our governance structured within the Commonwealth. So it is a taking of the tax dollars potentially and distributing towards projects or compliance models that the state has determined are what are appropriate. So I absolutely agree that there's a bigger fundamental issue here that coming into compliance does not address, and that's a broader discussion to be had, and I think an important one at that.
And I would just add, if I could,
Sure,
to augment what Councilor Dombrowski said about the one-size-fits-all approach. The legislation didn't give us any credit for work we have done, or any municipality has done. As you saw from the numbers, we've gone from 7% to 9.13% in our SHI over the last 2 years and change. And yet, we got no credit for that whatsoever with this piece of legislation. That's why this is designed the way it is, where we make it impracticable for somebody to want to build something in some of the overlay districts that we have, because Grayson Loft is already there, the stuff on Foundry Street. So that's another fundamental unfairness, in my opinion, by the state legislature, not looking at the municipalities and say, you know what, we're going to give you credit for being proactive and trying to get your way up to 10%, as Wakefield has been, going back to that inclusionary zoning bylaw change that was made back in 2015 that Sam talked about in the presentation.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. Local control is kind of the oxymoron of the 2020s. Don't seem to have a heck of a lot of it. Yeah. I'm not pleased any more than my cohorts are. Any other questions from the room? Yes, sir.
Quentin O'Donnell, Fizzlewood Drive. I don't own a property on this list, but if I did, I could sell it to a builder.
Sure.
Okay. So if everybody on Elm Street wanted to sell their building, it's conceivable, possible,
Absolutely possible and conceivable. It's free country.
as long as they stick to all the guidelines that you have presented here.
That is correct. They have to meet the guidelines, you know,
And there's a cap.
assuming that they sold to someone who was then going to develop, yes.
And but there's still a cap on a particular area, like at some point, the last person to sell might say, they might be told, sorry, we've reached our maximum.
Well, one quick thing to clarify.
Yep.
Whether or not you sell has nothing to do with MBTA communities. It's what gets developed. So if somebody sells it, let's say they get the development rights for a building, but they don't develop the building, they could potentially go to somebody and talk to them about that. But MBTA communities would have nothing to do with the exchange of the property. As for the maximum density of the area, if there's, let's see here, under MBTA communities, it says there's, 70 units that could be built in an area, and there's already 80, which is like that on Albion. Just because somebody wants to come in and develop it does not mean that there's a cap on what's on the area. It's what could be built if everything in that area were completely leveled, or if it were all blank, just starting with a blank slate, and things were rebuilt under MBTA communities, not under existing zoning, but under MBTA communities, and what could be done by right. then somebody would be able to build within the parameters of the MBTA communities overlay. And so that's where that number comes from. So if everything were gone, then you would potentially see only 70 units instead of the 80 that are there on Albion or whatever the numbers are. I don't remember off the top of my head. But nothing is a maximum or a cap because it all relates back to what you can meet on site. So if under MBTA communities, let's say you could do with a 3-story building with the square footage that they have on the lot, they could do 8 units, but they can only provide parking for 6. Then they can only provide parking for 6, meaning, and they can only build 6 units. They can't get additional waivers under MBTA communities. The way that it's structured is that it's what you can do by right. So if you're going to go outside of that, then you have to revert back to standard zoning and have discretionary zoning reviews, such as the special permit process.
I mean, if I can just follow up with that, so if we have a maximum, this is the maximum, is it safe to say that it's very unlikely that that maximum is going to be what we see in reality?
Albion is the only one that might be slightly different just because of the existing garden apartment building at the corner of Foster and Richardson, but the rest of them is highly unlikely we're even going to be able to see their maximum because of existing conditions. And the fact that I think every single one of the parcels, there might be one that's vacant, but all of them have existing structures on them. All of them have been built out in some capacity. Even if it's just a parking lot, it's still, there is an existing use there currently. So in order for that to change, somebody not only has to come in and want to develop it, but the proposed project also needs to, what they call pencil, it needs to work out the math. And there's so many different little moving pieces that there can be a lot that goes into it. And of course, should this get passed or anybody try to come forward, you know, the town is here to help somebody through that process, but they're still going to have to follow the letter of the law. Should this or any other zoning regulation get passed, it's still things that they have to meet.
And I think the focus, one more second, John, sorry. I think the focus last time around, I had heard some folks on the working group talk about, well, how often is this gonna happen? How often is somebody gonna sell? And you know, I don't wanna focus on that because if I owned that single family in Cedar Street myself, you know, and I could make it into a 3-family or possibly a 4-family, there wouldn't be anything stopping me from going to a builder and talking about maybe a little partnership or something of that nature. I wouldn't have to pass, I wouldn't have to move out of state to do that. What we've tried to do here, I think, is minimize the risk. I consider this because most of what I hear from people in town is we don't want a ton more building. I hear that a lot. So I think we've minimized the risk of the amount of that happening. If that helps at all. I'm sorry, John. Keep
I
going.
just want to say that 20 years ago, nobody would think of taking industrial property and turning it to housing. I mean, you know, Ruth Woodbury from the 1950s would be rolling over because this is not the way they designed it. But what happened is, you know, progress worked against us and caught us off guard. But I've said this once before, in some instances, not all, certainly not a great majority, in a small amount of instances, some people may benefit. They may all of a sudden look and say, well, geez, you know, I got a piece of property here, I might sell to a developer or do it myself. And again, I think the risk that these gentlemen here took out of the process is great, but there's nothing that's going to stop someone from saying, hey, I might be able to benefit from this.
That's
And
my
looking
concern.
at a given situation, but I think my review of it thus far is in very few situations you're gonna find that.
I did have a couple of different property owners that are not within the district boundaries, but kind of in relatively close proximity, ask if they could be included. So people do
Doesn't work that way.
people do, and yeah, I was like, well, and unfortunately, if a parcel had limitations for watershed or for wetlands, then it can't be developed by right because it can't meet the letter of the law. So under MBTA communities, there's a higher threshold for setbacks from wetlands and watershed areas. So there's certain areas that couldn't be developed. Most of those parcels were within those areas. So there are people that understand the potential benefit, because MBTA communities would resolve, or at least kind of remove part of the multi-layered process that somebody has to go through when developing a parcel. So rather than having to go through the special permit, there is a potential redevelopment that is still a higher use, but not the highest use, which is what somebody would potentially try to go to through the special permit process. That helps to clarify that a little.
The subcommittee has done a great job, I think, what I can read, to try to protect the town. But they can only go so far, and there is an opening there. And it still seems to me that a lot of unanticipated things could happen. So congratulations on a great attempt. I'm still very concerned. And if you look at my neighborhood, I'm not in the district. Old Nahat, Pheasantwood Drive, and Farm Street, where they converge, there's a little spit of land there that a man, he bought the home that was there with, somehow it was allowed to be developed, a little spit of land. He's been there since March, piling, driving away at granite to make enough room to put a little tiny house. So that tells me that there's people out there with their eye on Wakefield, and I think they're gonna start showing up as soon as they can. So,
I think they've been showing up.
yeah, well, I've seen it, yeah, so I've seen it, and this, I think, will allow for more.
I mean,
But
if I moved in 34 years ago, if I could turn the clock back, I
I
would.
hear you.
But where we are now, I mean,
But
the biggest amount of building has been our own 2015 zoning special permit district. You know, it's helped us with the SHI, but it's also increased the population.
But Lover, you do recognize, you said so tonight, that's clear, you recognize it, your hands are tied to a certain extent. So,
And I think 40B, to me, is a bigger problem than potentially 48, given the plan
Yeah.
that we've created.
Yeah.
Would be, but that's, you're weighing things that you don't like.
Yeah.
Is this one worse than this one?
Yeah.
And I think this might be less worse than 40B, which we're dealing with as well.
But I think we also have to be mindful that fundamentally, it may not stop here. The state may have another iteration of another takeover of municipal autonomy with respect to zoning. So we have to be very deliberate in the way that we're approaching this, because it may not be the end of it. So where you're referring to may be outside of this zone today, but there's maybe some other sort of semi 40A, kind of going forward. We don't know. And so I think that goes back to the broader discussion, which obviously is something that has to be, I think, focused on for each of our communities of what can we do to make sure that there's the messaging to the state that we are autonomous and want to preserve our own abilities, as a community to be able to make our own, create our own zoning. And so I think your point is a very important one in that regard, because we keep talking about this as if, okay, we just need to be compliant with 40A. But what's the next 40A equivalent that potentially could come down the pike? So I think it's an important dialogue. That's why we've been as restrictive as we believe we can be with this, as to have the least impact. And there's been a good amount of resistance to any sort of mandate, state mandate relative to this, and I think with good reason. But I think it opens up a broader discussion to be had with our legislature to be sure that we don't find ourselves as a community or any community in this kind of a situation again.
Mr. McCollum.
So there's been some great comments that have come up tonight, and I mean, you all know how I feel. I'm totally against this. I can say that I completely appreciate the job that you've all done to put this all together compared to how it was done before. And just in general, the openness, the transparency, the willingness to listen to people, putting out complaints that you get. Frankly, I wouldn't want to be on your side of the table, because I know probably gonna be a lot of times saying you've done a wonderful job putting this together.
You're not running in April?
That way?
You're not running in the spring?
I think you're right. I thought that's good. But to your point, that this isn't the first iteration of 40A. 40B came into effect, and it's been here for about 50 years. It's changed many, many times. And we've found ourselves in many situations where we keep chasing this dangling carrot. They've already identified half-mile radius zones that it has to be within. Those half-mile radius zones are gonna come up again. And this 48 is gonna be 40AA, 40A-2, 48-3. My whole thing is that I'm not opposed to what you're doing per se. I'm opposed to what the state is doing and what they're doing to us in all these towns. Because what they're saying is that you need to do this, but you have to vote your way into it. The only reason we have to vote our way into it is because it's zoning. And because of the way that the state is structured, we own our own zoning. So we have to vote our way into this. And if we don't, and they thought, well, maybe if they don't, all right, well, we'll do it. We'll take the 2/3 and we'll drop it down to 50, because that'll make it easier to pass. And that is, you know, one of our own representatives here in Wakefield, he was the one that signed off on this thing too. So we can't be lost on that. But it's a travesty that they're taking potential grant money and said, well, there's no punitive part of the law except for maybe you lose some grants. And then I said, well, okay, now you're gonna lose these grants. Now you're losing these grants. Now it's like, you might potentially be losing these grants, or your AAA bond rating might suffer because are you compliant with the MBTA thing? It's extortion. These are our own tax dollars. And I know that some of you feel the same way, but you're legally bound to try and do this stuff. But what I'm opposed to is the way that this is being rammed down our throat and forced to do it. We're being asked to vote. Why even vote if they're gonna say that we can do it, other than we get to say, okay, this is where it can go, when that's gonna change too. At some point, they're gonna come back and say, this is not enough. You're gonna have to expand these zones. And when we've already started it, that just opens the door for them to come in and just keep on pushing this down the road. So I'm gonna continue to fight, and I know I've sent some letters the past few days, and I know there's probably more copies here. But it's something that I'm vehemently gonna oppose, and a lot of people do. But I appreciate the work you've done, and I don't want them to be lost. And I know I've been going up to that because I recognize there is a ton of stuff in this, of things that I have complained about that have been done, and I appreciate that. But I'm still opposed, and it's not because of what you're doing.
Yeah, no, and I've appreciated your involvement throughout, and we have, and you brought up some good points. You know, we've addressed them. We've tried to do more in terms of publications, mailing, you know, or in the item, you know, so we've listened, you know, we've tried to do the best we can. Although I knew you wouldn't be voting for this regardless of what we did. That's fine. That's your right. And of course, we needed time because 4 lawyers isn't enough, you know, to deal with you. So we brought in 5 tonight. It's
Hi, Mike.
Yes.
Hi, Mike. We don't have any first hand raisers, but we do have online, but we do have Julie Scott for the second time.
Okay, I'll get to Julie in just a second. Thank you, Sherry. Yeah, and the next wave is already coming. It's the auxiliary dwelling units. We'll see what, if any, regs come out of those and what it actually means. I don't think we have regs yet, Steve.
No.
No, so, but we know it's coming.
But actually, that was, you shall have.
Yeah.
But at least it's statewide, so it's not just targeted at people that happen to be attached to the MBTA, which is failing.
Right. I'm just saying that's another change that's coming that could increase, you know, building, could increase density. That's what it's designed to do. Yeah, could we have Julie back for a second time?
Hi, Julie's back. Could you guys all make a pact with the community that all elected town officials, appointed town officials, town employees are giving out the same information? Because I received an email the other day that said that Wakefield has received $4.4 million of eligible grants over the last 2 to 3 years. And apparently what I'm seeing tonight, that's quite an inflated figure. And I know people, some are very passionately for this and some are very passionately against this, but there has to be an agreement that the numbers align amongst especially our elected town officials. If we could do that, I'd be super happy. I did take a couple of notes based on what I've heard. I'll be very, very brief. Let's see. the stripping of our autonomy for the first time, and maybe in other ways in the future, I'm worried, I'm distraught, actually, that not every community in Massachusetts is being asked to give up so much. And I see a blatant unfairness to that. They're not losing anything. We are. And in fact, we're not gaining anything from the state monetarily or anything. We're not getting rewarded for doing this. And some communities don't have to do anything. And it's shocking to me when I look at the amount of money we've received in state grants over the past couple of years. It's not a lot. Our state representatives, senators, they need to really get working. And I think the election showed us how a lot of people are starting to feel about our state leadership. Massachusetts being such a primarily Democratic state over the years, the numbers are dramatically shifting. And I think it in part has to do with this strong-handed action of our state government. And we'll see where it goes with that. Have we found out going forward, let's say a number of residents want to conform to this and take advantage, if they think it's an advantage, of this MBTA 3A Communities Act, will these building sites be will they be under the oversight, if that even makes sense, under the oversight? Will they have the oversight of the ZBA, the local ZBA, and the local planning board? I did ask this before. Will the state be taking over? Or will our ZBA and planning board have to really be schooled in all of this new law coming down the pike? Thank you.
I'll start to address a couple of things. I believe that our bylaw indicates that the ZBA, am I correct, Tom? The ZBA will have, Steve, yeah, ZBA will have authority on 48 applications, Julie. I don't really think, I'll avoid the politics, but I don't really think I have any power to create a pact with anybody and take away their First Amendment rights to send out an email blast. And
oh, I'm not saying they can't send out an email blast, but the number should be the same.
I'm not disagreeing with you, and I've made my opinion clear on that, but I don't think that's something that we can necessarily through town council control.
I mean, members of the town council should be giving out the same figures.
I think, to your point, Mr. Chairman, this subcommittee is committed to making sure that we have the most updated information, be it grants or dollars. And so we can't control what other people might blast out with emails and the like, but we can say that I think we can commit to making sure that we put out that information to the best of our ability. And so I would say use us as the primary resource relative to this, because this subcommittee ultimately is responsible for presentation at town meeting of this. So we're going to have the most up-to-date and hopefully the most accurate data possible.
And you'll notice that the members of the subcommittee aren't sending out individual emails.
Correct. And I thank you for that. Thank you. You're absolutely right. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Any other hands up online, Sherry?
No, Mike, all's quiet.
Okay, everybody currently copacetic here? If we are, we can move on to the next important agenda item, which is minutes. And we have minutes from July 11th. I'm sorry, July 11th, July 18th. I'm working with a new lens and whatnot. August 19th, 9/12, 10/3, and 10/29. Thank you. You had a chance, people had a chance to review the minutes, and I think you might have, Councilor Vincent had some changes in prior minutes.
No.
You haven't? Okay, are you good with these?
Yes, I'm fine.
I'm fine. I'll say certain of these I was not at, so I would.
Okay.
I vote in support of all the minutes at which I was present.
Right. And the only ones that we previously approved, Councilman Dombrowski, were the two public hearings, because you weren't there, right?
Right.
So we approved those, right? These are actual meetings that we had.
So if I take a motion, Sherry, will you be able to make it 3-0, except for those where Counselor Dombrowski would abstain.
Yes.
Can we do that? I'll entertain such a motion.
So moved as presented.
Second.
Moved and seconded, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, raise your hand, say aye. That's 3-0, Sherry. Moving on, we have, I took that out of line actually, because we also have town meeting presentation. I'm sorry, I took 4 before 3. I'll blame the aye. Town meeting presentation. We were going to have a discussion that we haven't had in terms of, this ties into Julie's earlier question, why we're hedging a little bit, because we're doing everything in the open. I don't know what these folks think. We're trying to just talk about how we're going to go about the town meeting presentation. Like to kick us off?
Sure.
Town administrator, you know, not only were you late, I'm just joking, I was at a finance committee
I
meeting.
just wanna say, the interesting thing about this is the three of us are litigators. And Steve also has litigation experience in the past, and you're used to preparing for trial a certain way. We have to prepare for this situation in the open, because of the open. So you are going to hear us deliberate on how we want to prepare for town meeting.
Very behind the scenes open.
Yeah.
All right, so I think that it's Article 4, if I'm not mistaken,
Yes,
town
it is.
meeting. So I think that let's start, again, a great job of being in public, and I know it's kind of, I would say it's uncomfortable, but it's kind of odd.
Unusual.
Unusual.
Totally.
But I think the first thing should be, who's gonna make the motion, which is very simple, a couple of words. And then there's a presentation. I think the presentation, a lot of it will, is tonight. I have a couple of, I think we should discuss parts of it as we go forward. But who's gonna make the motion, who's gonna make the presentation? I will say that this presentation probably is about 20 minutes. You're going, yes.
Yeah, I can cut some of it out,
Yeah,
but
no,
generally speaking,
It's
when I
about
get
20
into
minutes.
20 minutes.
I did speak to the moderator today, and I told them that I thought that we would be asking for a extended time to present this. I think it's important that the public gets the whole thing. So maybe that's the first thing I'd like to see, is the board comfortable, is the subcommittee comfortable with that? Of course, the body may not vote for it, but I think that's the first thing out of the gate. I think
I'm
people-
comfortable requesting it personally. We can hear from the other subcommittee members. Not everybody will have been to all these meetings. Some people will be digesting a lot, maybe for the first time. Happens at town meeting, we've seen that. So I would think we would want to give enough time to make a good presentation or a full presentation.
And that makes sense.
I think also too, the more complete we can be, even if someone is tuned into this, it might remind them of certain questions or issues that they had. So I think the more comprehensive, the better.
Or may answer questions before the rest.
Absolutely.
Personally, I think the motion should be made by the chair.
The original motion, okay.
The original motion should be made by Chair McLean, not just the chair of the subcommittee, but chair of the town
Okay, I think if I can keep going, Mr. Chairman?
Please.
I think the presentation is excellent. I think, I know Sam has spent hours and hours on this. I think it really is very clear, the areas that, the subcommittee has, looked at over the last, I guess, 3 months, 4 months of fun that we've had doing this. I think that, the character areas are very well defined. I think that's pretty clear, as it goes forward. And then I do get to, a couple of speakers brought it up. I think the question of grants is a hard one. And I think we've talked about that, we certainly don't wanna be alarmists on this. But the fact is that every day we check, I think we all kind of check at our own pace, but I was surprised the other day to check on the DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, website, saw four new grants pop up. So I went and looked at them and I, see what, if there were changes in the requirements. And two of them on there stated very clearly, and I think the language is in here, this is the same one that came up, must be compliant with MBTA to receive the grant. And this was, had to do with extra supplemental monies to communities that are in the METCO program for special ed needs. And when I clicked on it, I said, I can't believe this would be part of this. And yet, right there it was, that same language must be compliant. So I think to the extent that there's different numbers going out there, I think it's a moving target every day, it seems something gets added.
Right, Sam, did you say that particular one was 500,000?
So
Currently,
our
Because I'm gonna
primary,
be careful about.
yeah,
numbers.
sure.
Yeah.
The primary METCO grant is just over 500,000.
Right.
And it has been for the last number of years. The supplemental grant is discretionary, I mean, it depends on what you're applying for. But it is the first of the METCO program, of that METCO umbrella of grants that is impacted.
And the first sped grant that I saw.
Right, that's bothersome, but we can't assign a number to
No,
that.
I can't,
No,
no.
Okay, right. We've had a lot of discussion before you arrived
Okay.
tonight about that. I would like the 3.7 to be changed to 5 years. I can send you the email I
yeah,
got.
we'll have to go back through that anyway, so we can check and see what addition, because of the additional grants that have been added.
Right, but when we say 2 to 4 million in TIF money, I want to be clear, but is that,
In the tip money,
because you were TIF money, because you were saying that part of that was state, and part of it was federal.
right, probably 20% of tip money is usually state.
Is that 2 to 4 million? Because I don't want 2 to 4 million on one of our presentation
2 to
screens.
4 million was Bill.
Bill's,
Renaud
that's-
that was the number he gave them.
And that's the
We would
state money.
be impacted, yes.
That's the state portion.
That's the
That would
state
be
portion,
Yeah.
okay,
But
just
we'll double check that.
trying to be clear.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, it's every day. It's-
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Now, let's talk about some of the very basics of town meeting. So the chair is gonna do the motion. My personal belief is that the presentation be made by the chair and Sam up at the podium together. This is one of the few times in a long time that the town council set up a subcommittee, correct? I think it's important to show that the town council took this issue so seriously that for the first time in recent memory, we set up a subcommittee. And I think it's important to have the chair, who's not just the chair of the subcommittee, but of the town council and the town planner, senior planner, to be up there together to make the presentation. Whether you want to stand with Sam while she's talking and then you guys can work it out, you can interject when you want to, but I think it's important to me that both of you are standing up there at the podium. I also want to make sure, because I think this is important too, that if Councilor Dombrowski and I want to speak, we should be able to speak at the podium down by the stage. Because we are on the subcommittee. I don't think we need to go up to the halfway, in the auditorium and speak
That's all
from
set.
there. Is that all? These
All
are
set.
basics that I want to
All
make
set.
sure, I don't want Mr. Carroll to tell me I have to go take a walk. I want to make sure this stuff is clear.
You need to tell him to take a look, right? Yeah, that's all set.
So these are just very basic things that
Yes.
I want to make sure that, because we haven't done this before in terms of having a town council subcommittee.
That's all set. Yep.
Now, what happens if other people on the town council want to speak? Are they going to be able to go to that podium too, or do they have to go?
I mean, I have never been, I don't never understood why town councils walk away into that. It seems to me, what does it matter? To me. I think it's up to the town moderator.
But personally, I think they should.
We can
also
all
be
hear
able to
from, we
speak
can hear from each microphone.
Okay.
Why walk away? But I do think the subcommittee should absolutely.
I think that makes sense. Are you comfortable doing
Yeah,
that, Mike?
sure.
Are you comfortable with that, Sam?
Sam's gonna do most of the work.
Yeah.
But yeah, happy to have us both up there, fielding questions as we can. Did you have anything else?
No, I'm saying I talked about the grant portion and I know you guys
Yeah.
already discussed it, and again, sorry, I had finance committee, so I couldn't.
Do you think, Sam, that we need all of the screens on grants that we put up today? Are they all pretty essential? We put up,
For
well, we
town
put up,
meeting?
yeah, for town meeting.
I don't know that they're essential. it's entirely up to, I think, the subcommittee as to how much of that information they want to be.
Right, I mean, if it's up
Shared.
there and it's small print, I mean, you
Yeah,
know,
it's, I mean, that's generally speaking, the less text on the slide, the better.
Right.
Not just, it also distracts somebody from whatever it is you're saying. But I would defer to you as to what of those slides, if any, related to the grants that we want to have included. We have them here mostly in the smaller sessions because they're informational.
right, right, I mean, maybe it's the age of the eyes, but, you know, I like to have people be able to read the material as much as possible. I mean, you might not be able to put a map up there that gets every street, for example, but, you know, I'd rather have 3 pages, click, 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 where items can be seen as opposed to 1 page with small print.
Like, what I like at town meeting is when we do have handouts, and I think actually having printed material that people can have, because one, it's not just on a slide for like 15 seconds on the screen, but you're there, you can refer to it, if you're asking a question,
Yep.
you can bring the material with you. So we can make that happen, right, see, without a problem. I think,
Like we have this already.
Right,
You can
yeah.
augment this by putting grants, if the grants aren't in this particular one.
you know, even having the map, those sorts of things, so people have that at the ready. It gives people more time who are participating to make sure they read and understand. If they have questions, they can like rely upon that. It just feels like, and to your point, I think it then makes the slides slightly more abbreviated. You know, and so
Right.
it has a bit, it strips it a bit of the text. The concepts obviously are important, but you know, in the handout you grabbed on your way in, it lists all the different grants we're talking about here. That just feels like the flow might be a little better.
Sure. I mean, just kind of to build on that too, I mean, there's the potential to put, because of the way that the bylaw is written, all of the setbacks and everything are at a table. We can also put that on as part of the handout, so people could readily visibly see that versus having all the text on the screen.
I just think it gives people more time and then people can digest and process whatever
Sure.
in particular they're focused on versus just being paced by your clicking of the, or, you know, any part, you know, like.
Right. Mr. Carney,
So I'm not part of the committee, but I just want to suggest, I am hearing impaired. And I got lost a little bit, and I just want to offer this as a suggestion. Have everything in writing and follow it as you go through the meeting, page by page. Because I think you moved past a page, I had to go searching for it.
Oh, the page, yeah, it didn't correspond.
So if you have a
Sure.
direct order, it's very, very helpful for people who might not pick up what you're saying, you know.
right, right. Yeah, and maybe we can reference, you know, we're on slide 12 and people can look at it if they can't see everything on the screen from a distance. Thank you.
We have a very good presentation for why we need to comply. We need to consider addressing some of what we heard at town council meetings and in the public of folks who don't think this goes far enough. In fact, we heard that people may not show up for town meeting because they don't think that this plan goes far enough and that the town needs more housing and isn't doing enough to address housing. Do we need to be prepared to not just give the talk about why we need to comply, but give the talk as to why we are doing minimal compliance, and tell the story about how Wakefield has made tremendous progress in their housing inventory over the last 10 years. And then you have that in your slides about the inclusionary zoning. But do we need to expand on that at town meeting with those who may come there and feel this doesn't go far enough, or in the next couple of weeks, those who feel I may not go to town meetings because I don't like this plan because this plan doesn't do enough to increase housing in Wakefield. And that may be because they don't know the facts of the progress that Wakefield has made, especially over the last couple of years on our way to 10% on the SHI.
There are 2 places that you could highlight, that's Sam and Mike. One would be the survey piece, you know, which seemed to really skew towards what this plan reflects. And then the other is when we're talking about the 40B, you know, those stats, which have been increasingly improving towards the 10%, being able to make reference of it there as well. And also, I think within that, making it clear that at Springtown meeting, there were 3 proposals that were all defeated, that took it, that went beyond the minimum compliance model, so that the charge really became quite apparent that minimum compliance would be the ceiling, not the floor. And I would also just remind folks, as I did when someone raised this at our recent town council meeting, this is a state mandate. We have authority to create zoning however we deem appropriate within our town. So if there are concerns about housing, or if people feel strongly, there are processes to be able to address zoning issues within our town, separate and apart from 40A. And 40A, this one size fits all approach that we feel is being forced upon us, is not the vehicle to do that from a lot of folks' perspective, including my own. So if that is a legitimate concern for folks, there are avenues that can be pursued relative to that. The planning board, for instance, in the future. And people are certainly welcome and entitled and encouraged to do that. If that's what so I think relaying that is probably helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a really great way to tie in that the housing production plan services are coming out to help engage with the public.
Is that gonna be available?
I don't know the exact date.
No, for the town meeting?
It's something, I don't know the exact date. I'll double check on that.
Right. You know,
It all ties together.
and I'm gonna praise you here because you have the longevity, but when the town council had a housing production plan back in 2015, one of the recommendations on page 75 was to allowing as of right residential development. And the town council didn't do that. Instead, what happened was the inclusionary zoning bylaw Springtown meeting. And I think that was an extremely wise choice by the town council back in that time frame when the housing production plan existed between 2015 and 2020. At any point in time during that 5 years, the town council could have said, do we want to go with inclusionary zoning at 18%? Or do we want to do an as of right residential development as recommended, one of the possible recommendations in the housing production plan? And I think it was very wise for the town council to go in the direction of inclusionary zoning. So to your point, if folks, if they want to make changes outside of 40A, the town council could have made an as of right and chose not to. And I think if they had gone down that path, we would not be as far along as we are in the housing inventory. So I thought that was a very wise move by the town council to go with the inclusionary zoning path as opposed to the as of right path.
I might say, if I can, I know I'm not a member of the committee, but I'd like to talk.
Go right ahead.
Okay. Not only, we do highlight the number of affordable units that the inclusionary zoning created, but it also created a lot of units that are market rate.
Yes.
And I think maybe we should highlight that number, because that's still out there. That inclusionary zoning is still out there. We're seeing development now. The project on Foundry Street is already going under that. Warner Power, other places. So not only were there affordable units, which is great, got us like over 9%, but there were market rate and a lot of them. I think we should highlight that. And we are capturing that, great word that's put in there, capturing that within this.
Yes.
4
And that we're pursuing a housing production plan right now with the steering committee and consultant, that the goal is to have that presented to the town council by the spring. It then goes to the state. The state usually takes 3 months to pass that. So ideally, that can be approved by the state in, let's say, the summer of 25. It's good for 5 years, which takes us to the summer of 30. The reason that's important is when the census comes out every 10 years, that's when the state does our housing inventory numbers to tell us whether we're at 10% or not. So we could be at 10% and at some point in time at the end of this decade fall below that when 2030 comes out. But the town is protected because you have a housing production plan that will be in existence through the summer of 2030, which the town council then in 2030 can look to either update it for an additional 5 years or use it to get it certified so that we can push back on 40Bs if we somehow fall below 10%. So there's a lot of different moving parts that we're doing to control housing. It isn't just complying with this 40A, it's putting a housing production plan in place so that we actually have, with goal towards getting to 10%, which we're almost at, but also to make sure that we have protections in place in the future as well. So we're looking long range as far as housing here in Wakefield.
My concern is that we need to make sure we balance this so we don't get lost in the weeds of HPP and 40B and everything else too. Not disagreeing with the words you said. I mean, I think we should have a slide that says, you know, we managed in the heat of the summer to get 852 surveys and 57% here to indicate they wanted some kind of compromise. We could get that on one page. We could talk about how did we get here. There were three other different proposals. They were all defeated. I don't think we need to harp on it, but I think we could put that in quickly. I did a little, I think we actually have some special permit district in Greenwood, don't we?
We do.
And what's ever happened there? Nothing.
I'm not so sure if
Much,
that,
not
that
much.
the building, you know, on the other side from the commercial, I'm not sure if that's
Right.
built up, so not, but you're right, not much.
Not much. And, you know, we might do something further, you know, that's an argument, we could do something else outside, as Councilman Grusky said, outside of these districts or something else if we wanted further housing. I think, you know, at least this provides Greenwood with a small district, 12 acres, I think it is, 12-ish acres. Maybe we want to focus on the other three plants, having got 100 to 142 acres, whereas this one's 54. Acreage matters to you, it does to me. You know, the statement last time was, well, this is only X percent of our, you know, total acreage in town. Well, you know, a lot of that's the lake. But I was looking at that saying, well, you know, yeah, but it still seems to be a lot of the west side and a lot of all around one district, all around one train station. So, you know, maybe we do want to point out that this is not only minimal in terms of the unit count, it's also much less in terms of acreage and much more dense, which may actually be something the MBTA communities desires to have, building around the train station. I want to be careful about how, you know, we would like to get it done in 20 minutes. So I would just want to be careful how much we put
I
in.
won't go into detail on this, I'm just saying.
Yeah, no. I mean, you know, all good points. And I think-
It's just the folks that say we're not doing enough. I'm thinking of that angle, the folks that say, hey, they like the last plans. They wanted to do more than the minimum. I'm trying to make sure that we get those folks to vote for this, as opposed to saying, I don't think this goes far enough, I don't want to support it.
I don't think we should be getting anyone to vote for anything. I think we should just be presenting and let them decide. And, you know, like be it minimum compliance, maximum compliance, no compliance, you know, that's, I think we've all agreed that this is what we're presenting.
Well, that's
And then people make their choice. So I don't see this as persuasive. I see this is a matter of fact. We heard you. You said you wanted minimum compliance at most. This is what we can come up with as the least impactful based upon the surveys and all that we heard. And you can pursue this, or you can be non-compliant. But there are consequences as we see it with non-compliance. This is what they are. So I don't think we have to worry about being persuasive to try to address any concerns people have had in the past, you know, about us not going far enough. I think that was defeated. It was the resoundingly 3 times it was defeated. So I think that is not really ultimately going to be a major focus of town meeting at this point. People may have comment on that, but we saw that the majority of people at town meeting in the spring didn't support a model that was, you know, more ambitious than the minimum.
And the majority of people in the survey.
Right, exactly. So I think we have that as our basis to say, we recognize that and we understand that some people may not. Most people aren't gonna like this for different reasons, right? I mean, it doesn't go too far, it goes far enough that we're compliant, so we understand that. So that's what we're faced with. So to be as objective as we can, we can be non-compliant, these are the consequences. We can be compliant with this model, which we think achieves what the majority of people we've heard from are looking for, if we're to do anything.
Yeah, I think criticism can be expected from a variety of angles. And that's fine, I don't feel the need to convince anybody of anything, I don't feel the need to market anybody that isn't gonna show up because it doesn't go far enough, because they won't be there anyway.
I would hope the majority of town meeting ideally the entirety of town meeting would appreciate the fact that we can all agree that the state should not be making these decisions for us, and that's a local issue. And I really hope that that comes out more than anything else, because whether you're for or against this, and the size of it and the scope, this is a decision that we should keep within our own family, our Wakefield family. It's not a decision that should be handed down to us by someone else.
Counselor.
You heard from a loyal opposition tonight. And you know, and I appreciate his comments. The fact that, you know, there are gonna be people that are against it. And, but what you heard tonight was a compliment, the fact that you did a great job of presenting it. And I think I ought to stick to that. But I think, Bob, you ought to be prepared to give your talk about that if that becomes an issue. Otherwise, I think it might be overthrown.
Samantha.
One quick thing to add just about the housing component, whether done enough, is something I've gotten a lot of questions on, both in person and phone calls, is whether or not this is all affordable housing, or if this is all Section 8 housing. And while, you know, we have to be very careful, as I've mentioned before, with fair housing regulations, we still, I think, want to make sure that, to Steve's point, that we've done a lot for market rate housing, and this is continuing those efforts. And I need to make sure it's very clear in the presentation, for whoever ends up doing that section or talking about that, whether it's me or anyone else, that it's only 10%. And it is at 80% AMI, and I'll make sure that number is included in there in some capacity, so.
Right. And, yeah, we need to explain what AMI is. We've kept using acronyms too much.
I'll put it in my notes.
We do, I do that enough at work.
Can I just as a point of order, I'm sorry.
Please,
I don't mean to interrupt, but in past meetings, you've a lot of conversation throughout your meeting, and I'm being respectful because I don't want to interrupt you, but I know Mr. Carney's asked any questions.
If you have any suggestions as to how we should present.
Will you be taking questions after you're done? Because I had some comments.
Public participation is closed, but that doesn't mean we can't reopen it, you know? I was hoping you could give me some good advice on how to present.
Well, first, I think as a subcommittee, I think you're the ones that developed this and put this warrant through as a subcommittee.
Yep.
So I think that if you are getting up to the microphone to speak, it would be you as a subcommittee. I'm just
Right,
wondering.
you mean more of the 3 than the 7,
Yes.
Not the full council.
not the full council.
Right. Will the street addresses be addressed up on the screen? And I guess, do the street addresses, I guess this would be a question maybe to Mr. Paul, do the street addresses need to match?
Do the street addresses need to match what?
That are currently in this article that's here.
Sure. Do they not?
I'm just asking. I mean, there's been a few different versions, so I
There's
just
only
want to make
one,
sure.
there's only one version that's the final version.
You know, all the. I appreciate your emails, but my basic response to most of your emails is this is a work in process, and there were a lot of changes made along the way necessarily. And as you've seen, out in public, transparently. What counts for purposes of the law is 14 days at least before the town meeting. There is a posted warrant. And from the time that that warrant is posted, there should be in the town clerk's office a copy of the warrant and a copy of the map that's referred to in the warrant. And if those things aren't there, I get concerned. If those things are there, the fact that there may have been mistakes made previously in stumbling toward that point, well, that's democracy.
Because I know that it was referred to the planning board by a vote on the 7th. But what the planning board got was the article with the list of addresses that were all 7. The draft warrant article was correct, except for the addresses, there was only 79. Sam mentioned that information she got from the consultant. And nobody checked that. I know there was 5 attorneys that reviewed the warrant. But the addresses weren't checked against the map. It was realized, because Mr. Carney brought that up, that he didn't think that the addresses matched the map. you had made a comment that there might be some changes that need to be made. Can we vote on this? With the caveat that you check for mistakes. Now, 35 addresses, which was equivalent of a couple acres worth of properties, were added into this warrant article after you voted on a draft that only had 79 properties. So technically, I think that this was supposed to be re-referred to the planning board because that was a substantial change from what you gave initially. So that was my whole thing with the maps. And I know, I said this whole long thing trying to explain this, but when you look at these, it says see map dated October 3rd, and there's no map that says October 3rd on it initially. There is no reference. That could be any map that was added in. It's not date stamped by the town clerk. So I went to town hall to look to see specifically, because I had realized when you brought it up that that was different too. So I went to see the planning board's on file version, which should be this. This thing that's sent to them. It wasn't there. They had just a generic file that said MBTA 4A, and it had the new warrant that you all approved without the final version being set in front of you to vote on, to know that actually all the language, because it had something else changed other than adding addresses, so taking addresses.
Since I was there, the vote from the council that I asked them to make was that I need to make sure the addresses are correct, but there was no other, the verbiage was always the verbiage.
Right. So it would have been the addresses that you checked, but
But
my point is that never came.
Specifically, that was the vote you made.
That was a condition of the vote. that you put
Exactly.
out. Yes.
I checked the, but that was never brought back to the board just to verify these are the addresses.
Because we entrusted the town administrator to.
Right, but in adding those addresses in, because they were added from what your original, what this original one you voted on this with 79 addresses. You voted to send this to the planning board. This is the one that went to the planning board.
No, we didn't vote on it with 79 addresses. We voted on it with 79 addresses, subject to additions and changes as determined for accuracy
Right,
by the town
yes, but what I'm saying
administrator.
on the original one with the planning board.
I think the bylaw that was referred to the planning board way back when, right? That was not the same night as they approved
This
the
was,
warrant.
so October 7th. This is the bylaw. The bylaw itself did not change from October
Correct.
7th up to October 1st when you voted on the draft. The bylaw itself was the same.
Right.
The map, if you can read it, because you can't, because it's not legible, I assume you not.
That's always made it
Because
much
you can't,
bigger.
because you can't tell, by this map. But the addresses, there was 79. You all voted on that, with 79, you sent it to the planning board. So when you made the change that Steve updated and added in the other 35, that was then not forwarded to the planning board. So what the planning board is working on is a document that has 79 addresses.
I've got to disagree about this, just as a matter of law. The Attorney General is emphatic that the planning board has a right through its hearing process to change the article that was presented to it. So that what the planning board recommends to town meeting could differ substantially from what the selectmen, or in our case, the town council, refers to the planning board. So here, assuming that there is some significant discrepancy between addresses that were identified in the referral and addresses that are now on file in the warrant, so what?
I understand that, but
And that
if
hearing
this
is
was-
not even until the 14th.
if-
That's on the 14th, that hearing. So that hearing has not even occurred yet.
Right,
That's
so
planning board hearing.
if this was done in the normal time events, the warrant article would have been done a long time before town meeting. Would have been sent to the planning board a long time before town meeting. And then the warrant would have been published and the warrant would have had the full complete addresses. But this has all been compressed. So a warrant has been issued and published that had all the corrected addresses that they are now privy to because it's out there in the public. So what they're going to be doing is playing catch up for you because you made a big mistake by not having all the original addresses, the original one that you voted on.
Well, maybe we disagree as to the size of the big mistake you're talking about. It seems to me you're trying to find a small technicality to bounce this thing out entirely. You know, if you're correct on that, whatever cause you may have to bring it up somewhere, feel free. You know, you're a citizen, you seem to know your information pretty well. We're not terribly worried that this isn't proper.
My point is, it's not even a technicality, it falls below that. Because I get concerned about matters of law, and this is really not a matter of law. You are making a kind of prudential point that things aren't as clear as they might have been, things are messier than they should be. Okay, I don't disagree, but from a legal standpoint, again, my response is, so what?
And we didn't go to a number, we clearly, because I asked the question at the meeting. Issue was that Steve wanted to clarify it. And this is in addition to what the planning board originally did. Nobody had a list of streets, nobody had addresses. This is something that was improving tenfold of what they did before. But now all of a sudden, we're letting people know. I get called from 3 different people who were on the list. So these are people who wouldn't have known 6 months
Well,
ago.
that's my whole point, because the first iteration didn't have any street listings. So when you look at the map, you could barely discern what was in there. Nobody knew if their properties were in there. So I appreciate the fact that the streets have
But
been.
people are getting mailers to this effect.
Everybody got
I
mail.
mean, I don't think there's more we can do, so, you know, in all due respect, Mr. McCauley, I don't know what the end game is with, you know, going back and trying to Monday morning quarterback this. We're compliant with the law as determined by town council. It hasn't gone before the planning board for a public hearing yet, that will be next week from tonight, actually. And so we've been compliant. In an ideal world, we would have 9 more months to be able to do this. We had a very contracted period as a result of what happened in Springtown meeting and the realities of the state mandated deadline. So we've worked on a very accelerated schedule, I think, to great effect. But ultimately, I'm not following what the end game is relative to the concern you raised. Aside from, I respect that you think there are certain process things that could have been done differently. But if they're not of legal significance, I don't know at this point, a week and 2 days from town meeting, what we achieve.
Yes, and my point in bringing this up, because I wanted clarification, because from what I was seeing, it didn't add up to me, and I appreciate you clarifying that. So that's my point in bringing it up, because if there were issues with it, I would think that they need to be addressed, because it could potentially be an issue for the town as well, right?
Town council, Mullen, you feel as if all that you know of this and you're well versed in what this whole process, you're comfortable that everything has been followed as the law requires to this point and going forward.
Yeah, I do.
That's my biggest concern as a member of the council.
Just to the chair, I just want to let all of you know.
Everybody, see you at town meeting. Thank you for
That-
coming.
Thanks for coming.
I have had people who have received their postcards already reach out, so I know that they are making their way around.
That to me, in practical terms, I know that that's not a requirement by any means, but I think it's a very important piece to this. If you're in this zone, you should be aware of that. And I think the direct outreach to each and every one of those individuals was an important, I know that Chairman, you pushed for that. That's an important piece to this. Those are the people that are most affected by it. Those are the people who should be, be made aware every way possible. And it sounds like it's paying dividends for us.
And I thank Councilor Carney for all his comments along the way, because, you were saying, people don't know what's going on. I do the best we can. You've got a certain amount of people that pay attention to, votes, townwide votes. Then you get to town meeting and it shrinks a little bit more, but, we're trying to, I was marketing people with a trick and treat. Town meeting, November 16th. Oh yeah, what's going on there? Well, there's a couple of articles, we all do what we can on the street. Here, we've, some of us are pretty conservative. We have spent thousands more than we normally would, thousands, to do more publication, to do more in the item, to do these mailings. But I don't believe we're done last time. And we've done our best. I guess that's all I can say.
No, I know, and I told you I appreciate.
Yeah.
I appreciate all the steps. I voiced my opinion, and a lot of my opinion's been heard. And a lot of it's not, and I'll be the first to tell you, I'm still against it, but I appreciate everything you've done. I just want to make that.
Yep, and I appreciate it.
Because I know you all volunteer, but I know most of you volunteer.
Yeah,
And sometimes it's very thankless.
We're just here for the fun. Any other questions, comments in the room or from counselors? If not, do we have any more to say about the preparation?
I think-
Or we
I
pretty
think
much
we've got enough.
covered the basics, so we can put together a final PowerPoint, hopefully get it online so that people can see it, including Julie. Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering, the T meeting or whatever it is that basically what tonight was? The next, you have several,
Yeah.
You mean the coffee hours?
coffee hours.
Yeah, so they're just like you can come, have some coffee,
But I mean,
donuts, sit
it's-
down and chat.
And that's gonna be
Say, they were big,
No, it's,
I just didn't want to, I can't come to tomorrow, so I didn't know if I was missing a lot or if this
No,
was.
all three of them,
They're the
will
same.
really just, we're there to answer questions. So it's more
Okay, so it
one-on-one,
gives
it's
me
not a
time to get more
presentation.
questions.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
very good, thank you.
and it's not a presentation. We'll have the maps up and you can
It's
ask.
just for questions
Just for
as
questions, yeah.
yes,
Did you say happy hours?
thank you.
I didn't say that.
That's what
Did you have something to?
Just one question, I know that this all needed to be submitted to the state for approval for the MBT for the, so part of this needed to be approved by the state before. Yes, has that come back yet?
We didn't have time for an initial review, but we've had, there's
Huh?
a couple different ways you can have review.
I'm married.
For one of them, we didn't have, we have
It's
approval
me.
for the mixed use,
That's me.
and that was one of the review processes.
I thought you
There's
knew it
another
was
one
me and I wanted
that
to place me.
requires a
This
90
is
day.
Bob, and this is my daughter.
Samantha, sorry, the people can't hear online.
We didn't have an adequate amount of time to be able to do that, but I
I
do
didn't
believe that
know
we've
that.
had a preliminary review.
From the AG.
In the AG's office.
Yeah, we ran this by the head of the municipal unit, Attorney General's office, and she was okay with it.
But it doesn't actually get stamped sent back.
It
but they
won't be,
gave
it wouldn't be
approval.
stamped until it went through, because there may or may not be any amendments made, so we can't really get that
Because I know
final.
last time there were changes that needed to be made, and I think that's because they came back and said you need to do this and that, and I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, and the foundation of this bylaw was built off of the previous one. So really the meat and potatoes of the things that changed were the setbacks and the boundaries and the addition of character areas, which has all been utilized by other municipalities that have done these.
Got it. Any other questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor? Aye. Sure, that's 3-0. Sherry, I close this meeting at 7:48 PM. Thank you all for your participation.